Here's the deal. On the count of 3, we're both gonna say the cabinet that we would have. Just the first one that comes to mind. You know what I mean? Like not the brand, but just what's the speaker configuration. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, 410.
That one.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, shout out to Alex at Barefaced. What is that? What is that thing? Big Twin 3. That's right. It's a 212 with a horn.
Yeah, it's a beast.
Yeah, it shakes the place.
Hello, I'm Alex from Barefaced, and I noticed a few weeks ago that Scott and Ian of Scott's Bass Lessons did a podcast about cabs. So you can listen to it via a podcasty thing, or they've got it on their podcast-specific YouTube channel. And from about half an hour in, it's about cabs. So do feel free to go and watch the whole thing, or we're going to have some edited highlights of that, along with my thoughts about what they've said. And the first thing is, yes, they like what we do, which is nice because those guys have used a lot of gear. They're great musicians, great bass players, and they get it when it comes to tone and those sorts of things. They are, however, not engineers, which was abundantly clear in the video, so I thought I'd correct some of their misinformation as well as basking in the glory of them saying we do nice things.
That cabinet is a monster.
Sounds, it's a monster. It shouldn't be called Barefaced, it should be called Bear Killer. Because you could kill bears with it.
Or like bear mace.
Or the Grizzly Mountains, whatever they're called. You know,
the Grizzly Mountains, dude.
I'd be taking one of them with me in a freaking 5-string. Watch out, bear.
It's a bit savage. That's the sort of name that you get on a mountain bike tyre. That is what I do when I'm not doing all the other things of life. Yes, they have more vicious names of bike parts, particularly tyres. Yes. Butcher, Cannibal. Bear Killer I don't think has happened yet. It would probably be a bit contentious with Whistler being the centre of the mountain biking world and rather full of grizzlies and black bears. One thing Scott and Ian talked about was them liking how quick a 12-inch driver was versus how quick a 10-inch driver was versus a 12-inch driver. And this is a common misconception. So why are these guys with great ears, great skills, thinking a 10 sounds quicker than a 12? Well, for starters, they're basing it on an inaccurate set of things. If you get a 10-inch speaker and a 12-inch speaker and all you do is make the cone bigger and you don't change anything about the motor, then yes, the 10-inch speaker will be quicker than the 12-inch speaker because simply you've got a heavier cone, more moving mass, and less motive force for that moving mass. Fair enough. But the reality is, if you design a speaker to be the best that speaker can be, you will not necessarily have a 12, which is slower than a 10. And in the case of our cabs, our 12XN driver is very, very quick. I suspect it is quicker than any bass guitar driver out there. If there's a fast one out there, I'd like to know about it. Maybe the case, but they have incredibly accurate transient response because they have a stiff, well-damped cone and suspension. So that gets the Q where it should be. So that's Q is kind of the reverse of resonance. And they have a lot of motive force. They have a big magnet with plenty of steel in the right places. So you get a lot of flux through the voice coil. So when the current flows in the voice coil to generate that electromagnetic field, that pushes hard. And the neomagnet is very rigid in terms of the magnetic field it creates. So it goes. It just propels. It's very instant. So why are Scott and Ian thinking that the transient response is better on a 10-inch driver than a 12-inch driver, particularly as they have a Big Twin 3, which is the epitome of what you can get out of our incredible 12XN driver there. So they've heard it, and they're thinking these 10-inch cabs are quicker. Well, it's simply that when you play a bass guitar, there are some very low frequencies generated, and those very lowest parts of the notes, so the fundamentals of our lower notes, they actually happen more slowly. So it's not that the speaker is moving more slowly with our 12XN, it's simply that you are hearing parts of the sound that happen slowly. Now you can choose to control them. I mean, I'm quite a tight, punchy bass player a lot of the time. when I want to be. It depends what I'm doing. But if I want to do that fingerstyle funk thing, I'm pretty tidy, pretty tight, pretty aggressive. And that punchiness means that I never find our 12xN is slow because I control that deeper low end. But if you've got a different approach to playing bass, and particularly if you've built a right hand style, I say right hand, plucking hand style, around how a certain cab behaves. So a typical, somewhat undersized 4x10 that doesn't really do the deep notes like our 12xN does, like a big PA system does, like studio monitors, big studio monitors, you know, proper size studio monitors. Then you will have built a style around a bass that doesn't go in the deep lows, and a cab that doesn't let that depth happen. And therefore you don't need to control it in the same way, you just expect it to happen and kind of sort itself out. So yeah, 10s aren't quicker than 12s necessarily, and you can make a 12 quicker than a 10, and certainly in the case of our cabs, our 12 is quicker than our 10 in its transient response, both stopping and starting, but it may not sound like it to you because you're hearing the parts of a bass sound that happen more slowly. Let me know if that makes sense, and if you've heard it. You may notice it if you've gone from cabs that don't go very low to cabs that have greater depth, even though they're more accurate. It is quite enlightening. Now, 4x10.
Here's one for you. Barefaced, or over there, you can't see that, 4x10 Eden, non-ported.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Barefaced.
Barefaced.
For sure. But I
know what you mean by the 410.
I come back to the 410 all the time. It's like a comfort zone for me. It's the cab, you know, like I got a PV carpet covered 410 back in the day. I love it.
But I do know what you mean about 410s, specifically the kind of sort of like the tightness of the 10s. It's got it's a different response than 12s. It's a faster attack. It's just something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something too about, you know, like I always thought as a kid, oh, 18s are going to give you all this bass, or 15s. And then you'd get one of those cabs and they kind of all sounded like this to me. And they didn't have the low end that I was looking for. And then some smart person told me about surface area of cone, and that like if you have 4 10-inch speakers, that's going to produce more air. It's going to move more air than one 18-inch speaker because you have more cones working together. There's companies that have a bunch of like little speakers, you know, in a box working together. I've never been able to just get on board aesthetically with that stuff where there's like a bunch of 6s in a box, you know, like
some of them are heavy.
The reason people like 4x10s is they are loud, they're efficient, and particularly if we go back to the 80s, that was the time when 4 10-inch speakers allowed you to get a lot of output out of a small cab with enough efficiency, enough bottom end, enough power handling that they worked. It's not a terrible way of making a cab, and we make a 4x10, but it's not the best way if you want accurate sound, but it is reliable and it does get you a lot of output out of a small size. And the other thing is that I shall draw a 4x10 here. We've actually got a few 4x10s in the other room. I should have brought one through, but I didn't, sorry. The reason I think the 4x10 is popular is because you have, especially if there's a horn in the middle, really well drawn, something that looks like it means business, you know, because it's got 4 speakers crammed into a space. Sometimes you get some of the, remember those? If I draw those bits top and bottom, how many dividers did they have? I can't remember. Does anyone shout Eden? They were wicked. They were really good cabs. Yeah, very throaty, fat. You know, they'd got a thing happening. But it's not necessarily the best way of building a cab, particularly because if you don't do what we do with our barefaced line array, you end up with the sound that's coming. Let's do this from above, draw it from above. And we've got our speakers. And the sound comes from this speaker. Draw that black and grab another colour. The sound comes from this speaker. And where these meet and cross over, we end up with them arguing because the path distance between there and there is different. So our mids and highs end up out of phase, and where the sonic response should be flat like that, instead we get comb filtering and you get wiggles in places, and sometimes those wiggles can be really bad. But also, what's worse still, is if this is the frequency response of a quite smoothly responding 10-inch driver, this is the frequency response of one 10-inch driver off axis. So it rolls off like that. It rolls off earlier based on the driver diameter of 10 inches. But if we put two 10-inch drivers side by side, they roll off axis an octave earlier. And that becomes really problematic when, pick a colour, any colour, go with black, when that here is about, let's say, 1.2 kilohertz, and that here is about, smudge number of hertz, 600 hertz, because there is a lot of detail here in your sound, particularly if you want to get heard on a gig. So that's the downside of the 4x10 approach with side-by-side drivers, that unless everyone's standing up a fire escape vertically like that, well, that doesn't even help, because then you've got them vertically arrayed. Basically, a 10-inch 4x10 cab has much worse dispersion than a vertical 210 or a stacked vertical 210s, unless you put a crossover in that knocks out the higher frequencies from one column of drivers, like we do. And we do that on our 210, our 410, our 610, and our 810 to maintain superior horizontal dispersion. Really helps. So yeah, 4x10s.
I am often motivated more by aesthetics than I am with sound. Dude, if something looks terrible, it could sound the best, and I won't even consider it. And that's on me. That's like vanity and stupid, but it's true. It's true. If stuff just doesn't meet, and it could look fine for someone else, that's fine. But there's like brands and makes and stuff that I'm like, no, I won't do it because I don't like the way it looks. And that's silly, but it's just true.
Well, no, but you know, like, it's good that you're transparent about it. You can actually say it.
Scott and Ian also been talking about how two 1x12 cabs just doesn't look as cool as one 2x12. I don't know if they sound the same. Essentially, two 1x12s can sound the same as one 1x12 if they're designed right. You can make two 1x12 cabs look awesome. I mean, obviously this is opinion. We all have opinions. I have too many, but there's a 112 down there. You can stack them and end up, two of them makes quite a cool stack. This is another 112. This is a different shape of 112. So that's a super compact down there. This is a super third, which is a reshaped compact to fit on top of our super twin down here. So that's a 212 with a 112 on top of it. If you're a bassist, ignore that, that's a guitar cab. This over here, if I head over this way, this is two 1x12s. You may not like the steel front and the slightly coloured look, grille look, but that is a pretty imposing two 1x12 stack, and you can have them with silver cloth grills or black cloth grills, or any custom grill actually if you want. But yeah, I think you can make a double 1x12 stack look really cool. There's a variety of aesthetics possible, but I don't think it has to look like a sort of, I don't know, things in rock and roll, you know, in all modern Western music. We want them to look cool. We don't need them to look sensible, you know. So we can make stuff that looks epic. It doesn't need to look practical or logical, even if it is secretly practical and logical. But yeah, you can definitely make two 1x12s sound as good as one 2x12 if you design them right, and that's a consistent theme of our cabs. That the reason I've got that double big baby stack for me is because I wanted the extra height in here, and I want to be able to use them as PA speakers for parties. But otherwise I could be using what's down here, which is Big Twin 3, just like Scott and Ian have got up at the Scots Bass Lessons place in Leeds. I think it's in Leeds, somewhere up in north. Other things they were chatting about. Right, the DB750, made by Aguilar. I think it's the DB751 now. I'm not quite sure what changed other than the knobs. I think something to do with the preamp voicing. It's a great head. It's got a ton of power. It's one of the sort of targets we have with the bass amps we've been working on, that we want that kind of ultra heavyweight sound without the ultra heavyweight actual weight. So we're working on that. Cab surprises. Now, this is an interesting one. I'm going to try and draw some. What is the point of whiteboard rubbers? What is that? It's not a rubber. That's just a smudger. Right. I played a gig a long time ago in a particularly acoustically horrific venue in Brighton, which I think might now be a Tesco Metro and probably sounds better for it. Shame to lose a venue, but really it did not sound good. But I played through this cab that I was like, what is that? What is it? And it was a Trace Elliott combo. I think it was called a BLX. I'm not sure what that was meant to mean. It does have implications in British English, certainly. But it looked like this. I can't remember if it was the one with the tweeter, but I'm not kidding. It looked like that from the front, some sort of winking robo-pirate. What there was, if it was the one with the tweeter, there was a tweeter up there. The woofer was hidden. I shall draw the woofer in orange. The woofer was hidden behind there, and there was just this slot in front of it, and then there was another slot there. What Trace Elliott had done, it's really quite clever design. They designed a band pass bass cab. It's just more smudgy mess. They designed a bandpass cab that worked full range. Now, a bandpass cab is a subwoofer where what you do is you have your woofer in its own enclosure driving into an enclosure that has a port on it. So the woofer is driving the port. The woofer doesn't actually work to the outside. And then you can do, that's a fourth order bandpass, or you could do a sixth order bandpass where you then have a port on that as well. And that is what they've done with this little Trace Elliott cab. The thing about a bandpass cab is it gets a lot of output out of a woofer at the expense of transient response and bandwidth in the low frequencies. But when you're trying to squeeze a lot of output out of a fairly poxy 10-inch bass combo, that bandpass trick worked very well for the sort of era that cab was. And the other upside was the sound, obviously, was from this hidden woofer, was really coloured because there was a lot of sound bouncing around, sort of reflections that you don't want, cancellations and stuff like that. So it was quite a coloured, honky, yeah, it was not a great sound, but you know what? You could hear it. And the reason you could hear it well was because of the diffraction, because the sound which then did escape from this chamber in front of the woofer came through this slot and then went off laterally and spread around the room much better than it would have done from that single 10. So yeah, it wasn't a pretty sound, but it was loud and you could hear it wherever you stood. And sometimes with live music, quite often with live music, it's more important to have an ugly bass sound that you can hear wherever you're standing than the prettiest bass sound in the world that you only hear when you're in the perfect spot in the venue or everyone else has got the right sound in your band at that moment in the song. Yeah, that was a surprise. Another cab they talked about was the Bag End 15, which I believe is behind Scott in the podcast. Let's have cut back, Dave, go and have a look and see if it's there. Cool cab. That is literally quality 15-inch driver, made by Bag End, possibly not just made for Bag End, fitted in one of Bag End's nice solid little cabs. They are heavy, but you know, cabs were back then because people didn't have access to CNC machines to make cabs lighter, essentially. That was why the big difference was. And also everyone assumed they had to be heavy and no one wanted to challenge, you know, the norm. I always seem to be challenging the norm, so that's just why we do what we do. And And that cab was quite interesting. It is the cab that caused a lot of people to think that rear ports really affect the sound of cabs, because using this non-smeary bit of the board here, I shall do another excellent illustration. So the bag end 15 from above, you've got big old 15 in a little box, and then they put the port, it's quite a big port, it's tuned quite high, doesn't have a lot of true bottom. Oh, I know why these are smudging now. These are flip chart markers, not whiteboard markers. There you go. These are for drawing on the paper. I should stop moaning at this. It's entirely my fault. That is an excellent case of user error. There we go. We're not always perfect. So our 15 generates output at the front, and the back of the 15 generates output as well, and that's what drives our low frequency port. However, if you put a port directly behind the middle of a speaker and make it quite big, quite a lot of mids escape out of it and then bounce around the room. That, depending on how you design a cab, that can be a really good thing or a really bad thing. In the case of the Bag N15, it's proven to be one of those cabs that sounds great in the right room and a bit sketchy in the wrong room. Particularly as when you've got a 15 like that, it might not have the best clarity in the world, and therefore you're relying on that bounce of what's coming off the back to fill in your power response, because power response is the sum of all your on and off axis response. So on axis being here, and then this is progressively further and further off axis. But when you're listening to sound comes at you, straight line, but also there's the sound that comes round and reflects at you. So your power response is the sum of those. So what you hear in a room is kind of a mix of your direct and reflected sound, and we can call that the power response. So if a speaker has quite poor off axis response, the power response ends up very much tilted towards the lows, so the extra mids escaping out that port and bouncing off walls could help a lot with that. Final thought, Ian, no, I don't want to call him what he called himself about his views on cosmetics, because I think it's fair enough to be fussy about what stuff looks like. My views have changed quite a bit over the years on what stuff looks like. I definitely used to be into more techie looking things, maybe that's why our logo's changed. I definitely used to be into more kind of exotic looking basses. There are some really cool ones out there, but I guess where I sit has just changed. I'm not. You can do what you like. This was my custom bass I had built years ago. My old Warwick is looking a bit battered and in need of some TLC, but that's another of those kind of wooden looking things. I mean, this is a through neck, so it's got some interesting stuff on the back. So that's a Rim Custom 5. Robbie is making basses again. He makes excellent basses, and that was epic and good value as well. Great bass. But now I'm tending more towards these kind of more old school looking things. So yeah, our opinions all change. But Ian was bemoaning the lack of retro styled, like guitar styled, cool looking old school bass cabs. And well, we do some. These are still our 12XMs with the painted finish, but you have them with cool cloth grills. This guitar cab over here, this is almost identical to our 610. The only difference is what's behind there. Oh, and the 610 is slightly deeper, but the width is the same. The Tolex is the same, the grill is the same. Again, down here, this is guitar 210, lurking down here, but that's got a custom grill, but that looks basically identical to our bass 210. So yeah, if you want a retro styled bass cab, so old looks but modern performance, we can do it. And I think that has hopefully covered all the stuff that I wanted to interject about in the Scott and Ian Scott's Bass Lessons podcast. So yeah, do go and watch the whole thing. They do loads of podcasts. If you have the time, you will learn many things from those guys and be inspired to make more music and get better at playing your bass. Anyway, I've been Alex from Barefaced. Thank you, Scott and Ian, for surprising me by liking our cabs so much. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, but I am. So that's nice. Cheers. See you next time.
Too. I mean, shout out to Alex at Barefaced. It's fairly portable. I mean, you might be able to do a few steps in the woods.
Yeah, check it out. I went over there and I went to like move it, and I was like, oh, it's actually
it's not bad.
Like, and it's got casters on it.
Yes, you can tilt it back.
Yeah, you can. At a stretch, you could, and bear in mind, like, I'm not like a, I wasn't going to say I'm a weak human, but I'm not sort of like, I don't want to sort of like lug massive loads of gear around.
Right.
But you could definitely do that on your own. You could
for
do
sure.
it. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.